Thanks to everyone for joining us today on today's call and webinar. And Larry, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate you being with us. You know, we originally had thought about today's webinar to focus on ULAs because it's Oracle's fiscal year end is coming, and 25% of all Oracle ULAs will probably expire in the next 60 days or so. So we thought that would be a good idea. And originally, I was going to just get up here and talk about our experiences helping customers with their ULAs. And Marissa had a great idea. She's like, why don't we have someone join you who's actually gone through that process of working with Oracle and negotiating ULAs. So that's why we have Larry Wood here today. So again, Larry, thank you for joining us. We'll get to your introductory slide in 1 second. I just want to make sure folks know a little bit about Palisade, and we're a consulting company, and we help organizations and governments with their Oracle licensing and contracting challenges. So we're 100% independent of Oracle. We're not a partner or reseller. So I've been doing this on the Palisade side for 9 years now. And the 16 years before that, I was at Oracle. Running their contracts and business practices organizations globally. So had about 1,000 people working for me. So lots and lots, literally half my life has been spent in the Oracle ecosystem. So lots to talk about when it comes to Oracle and ULAs. But I am not the star of today's show. I would like to introduce Larry Wood, my friend for many years now. Thank you again, Larry, for joining us. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Craig, and it's a pleasure to be here. I started my career in the military, and then consumer products, and then financial software. So 25-year procurement executive, and I most recently was with Intuit, and spent 25 years, or almost 25 years, 20 years, I guess, at Intuit, managing the procurement and sourcing arena. I am now with the Simps Group. The Simps Group is a boutique consulting group that focuses in areas of procurement with specific expertise in that area, but also C-suite advisory and other services. We also help supply side organizations work better with procurement organizations. So pleasure to be here, and pleasure to talk to you about my experience with Oracle.
Yeah, so I have to ask you, Larry, who's tougher, Oracle negotiations or your boot camp drill sergeant? What is the difference? Would you rather go through again, boot camp or an Oracle negotiation?
Yeah, well, I have to say that my freshman year at the academy, I went to the Naval Academy, was probably the hardest thing in my life. I was lucky not to have to go to any conflict areas during the military. So, but I have to say that being a plebe at the Naval Academy was worse.
Well, we appreciate that you did that, and thank you for your service there.
Thank you.
I do want to, before we get into Oracle, I sort of want to talk a little bit, because you and I, in some respects, have a little bit, although different names on the places we worked. You went from this really big organization to a startup, basically starting up your own consulting firm as one of the founders there. How was that? Like, why did you make such a drastic switch?
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy the variety of making an impact. And I really feel like the Simps Group, and Mike Sims is the former CPO at Microsoft. So we have a lot of big company connections. But I really like the ability to take what I've learned at these big companies and really focus it on areas of with organizations that can tap into that experience and make an impact. So this has been a wonderful sort of transition for me personally, but I think that, taking my experiences and contributing is really the reason, and what I'm experiencing.
Were you nervous making the jump?
I was. There is a little bit of challenge with doing things different, but it's been a wonderful experience for my family in that I get to spend a little more time with them, especially during the pandemic when a lot of things were done digitally and remotely. So I think that that helped in that a lot of the startup was during a situation where I could be at home and not have to worry about being on the road all the time as a consultant.
Yeah, I remember, people's like, well, what's the difference between working for a big company and a startup? And I remember I sum it up with business cards, right? I remember when I was at Oracle and I knew I needed new business cards, I would yell out into the hallway to Barbara and say, Barbara, I need more business cards. Can you get me business cards? And then I needed business cards here. And I was like, I actually need to design a business card. And where
Exactly.
do I order business cards from? And how many do I need? And then I got to pay for them. This is crazy. And it was like a half a day project to get business cards, right? Just sort of
Yeah.
go through that design and then you had to wait 3 weeks for them to arrive. So it's very different, I think, that whole, it took me anyway, a little time to adjust to that.
Yeah, absolutely. But I have to say that that you were very helpful. Had a conversation with Mike and I before we started all this. And one of the first things we did was get an admin to help us with all that, based on your recommendation.
Yes, you can't do everything yourself. So I actually prepared for this conversation today. So, and one of the reasons that I wanted you specifically to join me today, I mentioned before that you have gone through the process of negotiating with Oracle, right? So you bring that. The other thing is, another thing is, more than Oracle, right? So beyond Oracle. But the last reason, sort of the last check in the box, is that you're not anti-Oracle, right? So you're very much, you love their technology, you've sort of worked with them for years and years. So tell me overall your experience with companies you've worked for and them using Oracle.
Yeah.
What's been your general experience with that vendor?
Well, my experience has been very positive, and I think that's one of the things. Even though we're talking about how you come to the table with Oracle and use some of the power of information and relationship that you have, Oracle has been and always probably will be to my former company a very good partner, and we've had a very good relationship, very good account managers. The technology is always, it was a very heavy Oracle shop. We used a lot of their enterprise applications as well as their database technology. So there was a lot. And then over the course of my career, we used a lot more as Oracle acquired a lot of other organizations. So I think that, yeah, I just want to make sure that we do talk about that. My personal relationship and experience with Oracle has been very positive, and I have a lot of respect for the organization and for their technology.
And that's been our experience over the years as well, as we're working with customers and clients, is that they are very much liking that technology, right?
Yeah.
It's embedded in their processes and how they do business. Now, whether or not Oracle can sustain that in this new cloud first world is yet to be seen. We see, way too many customers whose first thing is, they tell me, is I'm moving off of Oracle. I'm getting away from Oracle, right? I hardly get any, and maybe it's just the nature of our business, but I hardly get any clients who come and say, we are going to buy more Oracle. We really want to move to that technology, right? It's more the opposite.
Yeah, I see that. Or I've heard that as well.
So you're seeing your clients today. I mean, is that
A lot. Most of my clients so far have not been focused on their Oracle technology, more other technologies in their enterprise suite.
Well, before we get, so I had a couple things I wanted to show you, but I know we have a poll question. So Marissa, can you bring up the poll question that we have? So I really do want this to be interactive. I promised everyone we wouldn't have PowerPoint slides, and we just had our introductory, and we've got one more at the end. But we want to know from you all on the phone, what are you looking to get out of today's call? Because we do want to focus on those things that you guys want to understand, and we'll answer your questions if you have things you want to submit in the chat. So you want to know how to negotiate a ULA, how to exit, how to reduce your costs, general best practices. Again, you could put some comments in there as well in terms of if you've got a specific question as we talk about, ULAs in particular. So Marissa, what do we have for some results? Not surprising.
Shocking.
How to reduce my Oracle costs. Shocking. How to exit and certify, and then best practice. So shocking, Larry, what do you think?
Yeah, no, this is absolutely, aligned with my experience is what we were looking for when we engaged with Palisade, not only the first time, but the subsequent times.
Everyone, I think, and maybe you could talk about that with, broader IT. There seems to be, and I don't know if it's the pandemic has just accelerated this, but cost reduction, right? Are you seeing that sort of as the primary driver in your clients as well?
Yeah, I think that, again, the disruption associated with and the unknowns associated with how COVID is going to play out have really had folks have their operating margins questioned, and they're obviously turning to IT costs as one of the biggest areas to get those costs, as well as service costs. So services as well as IT are the two big buckets that folks are doing that. With some, looking at their facilities cost as as a big area of opportunity. If they've found that this remote work does work for them and they can reduce their footprint.
Actually, that's a really interesting point. I'm wondering, as we pull out of this, hopefully pull out of this pandemic, all those big office spaces in New York City, right? Are they going to be full again, or are they not going to be full?
I think that's the big question. And I've heard a lot of, I'm on a lot of groups that are talking about, is it going to return? I mean, there's obviously going to be some high compliance organizations like financial institutions and defense that are going to have to pull people back in just because from a risk standpoint, it doesn't make sense. But, the others that have found that ability to do it's going to be commercial real estate is a big question as far as I'm concerned.
So, and that, I think, obviously this is not a huge issue in terms of the larger pandemic, but what's happening, I think, really affected Oracle sales, because they were used to, the Oracle bus would come up to your building, and out would come 5 Oracle sales reps, and they love to meet with you, and they love to sort of roam the facilities. And a lot of our clients, when we got involved, they had Oracle employees who had badges for their facilities. And they were just allowed these folks to run rampant. And Oracle was great at learning so much about your business, even maybe before then you knew it.
Well, I have to say, yes, my account managers knew more about my Oracle footprint than I did. And even more than the IT organization did, because again, they did roam the halls, and unfortunately we're one of those badged account manager organizations, and that was to our detriment. But we did kind of learn from the early days of that and kind of pull that back. So,
and I have to think Oracle's not the only one doing that, right?
Oh, no. I had a big exercise as, to go through every account manager that had a badge and figure out why they needed it. And there are some that obviously do need it, and there's others that no. For that very reason.
Do you think, so again, my focus, I have a very narrow focus on helping clients with Oracle, and you're much broader than I am. is Oracle really that different than other IT vendors? I mean, why is Oracle so special? I mean, when I talk to people about Oracle, I mean, that really gets some emotion out of them. And I don't see that with Salesforce or SAP. It just really, you talk about Oracle and then people just lose it sometimes.
Yeah, I think that, you know, my view, and this is only my view, that that the Oracle had such a refined sales process that worked that, you know, others are starting to adopt it. And I saw a lot of, you see a lot of executives migrating to Salesforce and AWS and to some of those, and you're going to see these same kind of tactics that work kind of at play as these executives adopt the Oracle way. But you know, they're the same in a lot of ways. You know, they're all looking at, you know, how do they um, provide value, but at the same time, you know, hit their numbers. And you know, a lot of them are taking this licensing, changes on a routine basis to see if they can, you know, monetize. The audit processes are obviously very much in the vein of Oracle. You know, finding using that as a profit center. So there's a lot of ways they're different. Are the same. There's a lot of ways that you know, the cloud and the SaaS based are changing the way that some of these providers actually you know, do that. They don't have the compliance requirements if they're completely user based, so they don't have to, you know, they don't have that card to play with, so they really just look at how they continue to add value in a different way.
So I saw this. I'm going to throw up on the screen something. I want you to take a look at this. Sort of, I was trying to figure out, you know, how do you explain Oracle versus other companies? And this, I love these graphic images of not graphical images,
Yeah, let's not be graphic.
and just sort of looking at all the different IT vendors and sort of this one on the bottom with Oracle, I thought was classic. How do we think of the Oracle org chart? It's like this entire legal
Very much.
department that's focused on, you know, watching customers and sometimes threatening customers and
Right.
competitors. And they even sued, you know, the when I was at Oracle, it was great, right? Because Larry sued the federal government when they tried to stop Oracle from buying PeopleSoft. And we were like,
Yeah.
no, Larry's gonna beat that. And sure enough, he did, right? He actually beat the federal government. And I think that was the big wave of acquisitions, you know, technology wise, software wise, really started with that one. JD Edwards was bought by PeopleSoft, and then Oracle bought, basically it was a 2-for-1 almost. Um, but that for me is sort of how I think a lot of people picture Oracle, as they're really scared of Oracle. And many, I can't do that. What will Oracle say if I do that? Oracle sales says I can't do. Like, why are people so scared of Oracle?
Yeah, I have to say that, and when we get into the story, I'm really going to highlight this. But as a procurement professional, when you have power over one of the big IT providers that traditionally come in and dictate terms to you, it really is kind of a pinnacle of your career, and really, you know, something that really gets you excited and energized about. And I have to say, my experience with partnering with you specifically in Palisade to actually get the information and the relationships that are necessary to be able to, you know, maximize that technology and to, you know, defend against some of the power that Oracle does have. And I have to say, going in, I was very much, you know, aligned to what you just said, which is scared of Oracle because they we had deployed them so massively under a ULA that we were really scared what the renewal was going to look like. And one of the things that you did is really change the mindset of the organization. We had this idea of traditional sourcing, which is minimize your footprint, lower your costs, all of that sort of of process to in your negotiation strategy. And you came in and kind of said, you're in a ULA, you have this virtualization environment, virtualized environment, more is less. Deploy as much as you can until the end, even create some potential headroom and give you, even if you don't certify, that gives you the ability to certify and be
Yep.
able to continue to use the technology um, for a period of time without the excessive or the licensing costs. And even if you do renew, you know, you can show that under the current ULA, you've deployed billions of dollars worth of list price software, and you're able to show that you are going to be less dependent on your new ULA because of what you've already deployed. So that was a big sort of turning point in our organization when you came in and kind of had that mind shift change for not only the IT organization, but also the sourcing organization.
Well, it definitely is there's a lot of misinformation around Oracle licensing. And, education is a lot of what we do in helping customers. I remember when I first started Palisade, the first 2 or 3 customers I had, I was telling them things like, I can't believe I have to tell people this. This is so obvious. And then finally, one of them, he pulled me aside. He's like, Craig, it's obvious to you because you've been doing this for 15 years, right? It's not like I don't have that depth of experience here. So it was, eye-opening for us. Sometimes I think it's sort of basic. Of course, this is how you deploy your ULA, right? But it's not, right? The renewal, and I think what you mean by that is, either the support renewal or the next ULA is going to be so high. So another graphic here that I have is, something we share with clients a lot is, what I think is an optimal way to manage a ULA. That's not it. That's it. So you think about your ULA and, it's got a certain length of time. And let's say this is the end. This is your May 31st date, right? You want to deploy the heck out of that thing using virtualization, using whatever means you have. And then, like you said, after the ULA, you create some headroom, right? You create some excess licensing. And this is, we've seen way too many clients who they'll do a ULA and say, this is my opportunity to consolidate. I was like, what? You have 10,000 licenses now. In 3 years, you're moving away from Oracle. You think you're going to be using 6,000 and you're going to give them millions more to use less stuff? Like, why would you ever do that? And it's just, I think what you said before, what we see with Oracle is they've got these really interesting contracts and policies that are the opposite of what traditional sourcing tells us to do, right? Minimize your deployment to reduce your costs. Doesn't work in a ULA. Here's another one: consolidate all of your agreements onto one, you'll get a better deal. But really with Oracle, you get repricing, right? So you've seen that, right? You've seen sort of client lock-in. Like, how do customers avoid that?
So let me just tell you the story of our Oracle usage and over the decade or so, because we had several ULAs that ULAs that we went into. But when I first took over the IT team, we ran a ULA and we had the traditional 90, 60-day outlook for our pipeline of deals. And I was really hesitant to say that we could really do this size deal. It was our largest deal at the time, in the 90-day window. And so I started saying we probably need some outside help. And I talked to Greg Tennyson, and you're my friend and former CPO at Oracle, who was at Salesforce at the time, and he said, this guy named Craig is really the guy you need to talk to because he's got all of this inside information. He came from their audit team, and he'll be able to really help you. And so we picked up this ULA about 6 months in advance, and with your help, started really looking at what does what have we deployed? And that's the biggest thing that I think that some customers don't go through, is knowing what their footprint is. Oracle does such a great job of allowing anybody and everybody in the organization to deploy the technology that you really don't know what your footprint looks like unless you have some very, very, very rigorous processes in place. And so, you know, you came in and said, that's the first thing we got to do. Knowledge is power. You got to know what you've got in order to be able to proceed. And so you took us through this scanning process to really make sure that, and interviewing process to really get to a footprint so we knew what we had deployed. And then a really good forecasting process of you know, with what we knew at the time about what the future held. And at the time, there was a lot of questions around, you know, how does virtualization going to impact how many licenses we're going to need? What is the public-private cloud? We had a private cloud strategy at the time, but you know, the public cloud was emerging. We had some concerns about the security of the public cloud, so whether that was going to be something we would use. So, so all of those things plowed into creating what we felt like is the best guess at our future use of all this technology. And then, you know, really taking a hard look at the terms of what we were allowed to do currently. And there's always this deployment of things that aren't on the ULA that you find too. And you just have to make sure that you understand what those look like, because at list, that can be a lot of money. And obviously you want that discounted. And so we, you know, Palisade came in and really helped us do all of those things. And I think we actually had a certification letter that we actually created in the negotiation and sent it across to them in draft form to show them how much work we had done to really understand what our footprint was. And I think that kind of took some of them by surprise, in that very few customers, in our experience, have that certification power in their pocket. And I think that that's what really helped us get this. And our ULA at the time, you helped us take our ULA costs. Yeah, I'll also say Oracle came in and their first quote was 1% of our revenue growth for the time frame we were in the Oracle, which is a standard Oracle strategy. And we kind of, you know, chuckled a little, but at the same time, you know, when it first came across, we had no basis for valuing, you know, what our renewal would look like. And so, you know, the certificate, going through the footprint analysis and the certification process really helped, you know, the organization understand what it really should be. And we cut our licensing costs for ultimately we decided to renew the ULA versus certify and exit out, which was certainly a strategy. And it was because we really wanted to have the confidence that that database technology and some of those things weren't going to be a hindrance to us deploying the kind of innovative products that we wanted to get out the door. And so, you know, we made a strategic decision that, you know, we don't want, you know, licensing costs to be a barrier. And so, but we did that, and we cut the licensing in half. And I think that was, you know, somewhat surprising given the fact that they had actually come in doubling, you know, what they expected out of our ULA. So we cut it in half. That was, you know, 8-figure savings. And then, you know, you obviously connected us with the right people. I have to say the account manager at the time scolded me, which I was perfectly fine with. I've never had a customer, a direct quote, never had a customer call 5 levels up in the Oracle organization and ask for what they want. And then she proceeded to give it to me. And so it was, you know, my experience with negotiating with Oracle has been, knowledge is power. Understand what the inner workings of Oracle, which you provided to us, and the relationship contacts that you really need to work with to be able to be successful.
It's really interesting because a lot of what I do, and it's not just me, right? You work with other people on the team who are much more intimately knowledgeable about measuring, licensing, and all that. But I remember when I was at Oracle once, and sort of made me laugh when you talk about escalating, because I had this global vice president position, had 1,000 people working for me, and I get this phone call one day from a sales rep at Oracle. He's like, I'm trying to get my deal through, and your team isn't helping, and I need some help. And I was like, oh, okay. Now I'm really annoyed because this person obviously tried to get a hold of their contracts person, their manager, their manager's man. And like, there was like 5 levels before they got to me. I'm embarrassed, right? They called 6 people
Right.
and no one picked up the phone except for me. So I'm annoyed. Now I'm going to ready. As soon as this person tells me, it's like, can you just tell me, like, how did you get my name? He's like, well, I called your boss first and she didn't pick up the phone. So now I'm working my way down the organization. I was like, God. I'm like, so you never actually talked to the person who's doing, no, I just started right at the top, right? So everything we do at Palisade, I learned at Oracle, right? So we started at the top and then go from there.
And I will just say that the sales rep does that too. They start at the CTO and work their way down rather than working with the partner managers that you've given them to work with.
And that's really important, I think, for those folks who are listening in here or watching, is to really understand you need a united front within your company.
I can't emphasize that enough. You drilled that in, and I have to say that we didn't know all of the people in our own organization that was using the technology, number one, and that we're talking to Oracle. And so that people inventory is just as crucial as understanding, and the communication to that team is just as crucial as identifying what your licensing footprint is.
Because if you go in and you take a really tough stand with Oracle and you've got all your information, they're going to call the CEO. They're going to call the board of directors. They're going to call someone who's going to come down on you. So definitely, we say it takes a village to win an Oracle negotiation. Don't ever lose one alone, right? Don't ever lose. You will always lose alone against Oracle because there's 25 reps, especially a big organization. There's 25, 30, 40 people at Oracle who know people in your company, and they will use every lever they can to their benefit, to their credit.
Right. Very, very effective. And I see that, again, migrating into the other sort of technology providers as to how they actually operate.
Right. So if you were back at a big company right now and you were negotiating a ULA with Oracle, let's say you didn't have a ULA and you're sort of starting from scratch, what would your strategy be? How would you approach Oracle? What would you, what would you do?
First, hire Palisade. I would.
I did not pay for that. No,
You didn't pay for that, but again, I think that no, I would do the first thing would be obviously to do an assessment with the IT organization on what is the deployments. You can't, obviously, if they have a really good software asset management program in place and they actually know what that looks like, that's great. And then what's the maintenance stream associated with that, and then work on the forecast with all of the teams, and that's where you really do pound on the doors and just go around and ask everybody what their Oracle usage is, and that's even more significant now that the Oracle titles are so broad. Because I have to say there are times where I didn't even know that we were using an Oracle product because it was not branded Oracle. And so your partner manager, and we didn't have partner managers at the beginning, and assigning them to make sure that they understand what all of those products are, and making sure that they've got a good handle is step one. And then, again, I think depending upon, and then you would start working with what your account manager knows, and what your account manager knows. And again, understanding what's important to them. One of the things that you did for us is to, at the last minute, we asked for an additional year on our ULA at no cost. And we got that only because you had educated us on what that sales organization is rewarded on, and they could care less. Because in 3 years or 4 years, that account person plans on being on another account and won't be dealing with the fact that they won't be getting that extra year. And that was so informative to us. And we've used that over and over with I've had some of my team use that over and over with other technology providers to really dig in and understand if that timing of the agreement is really significant to them. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And so really talking to the Oracle organization and understanding, and then I would, from that, develop the strategy around what the deployment. And I think the biggest risk in any technology deployment is change, because things are changing so rapidly in our world. Back when you and I were doing a lot of this, it was virtualization and public cloud. Now it's cybersecurity and a myriad of other things that are really we don't really know how that, and the proliferation of public cloud, obviously, and how that's actually going to impact IT technology. So I think that, really just doing the best you can on forecasting what the future looks like, and what that large organization is going to need, and what are some of the other competitors and alternatives. I think that's the other thing that I was somewhat burdened by, and I think that every CIO is burdened by, is their what they've deployed already. I mean, technology changing out of technology is very costly and difficult, and implementing a new technology, and you don't do it without a lot of upside. And so, really looking at what that does, and then taking a look at what should I price hold and what should I actually go in unlimited, because every single deal that you and I have done together, we've had some titles that we've done price holds, others we've based on the revenue metric, and others we've actually gone in the unlimited. And so identifying what that technology categorization is, and actually working with Oracle to get their quote and what they're expecting out of it would be the strategy.
I think you mentioned before the getting that quote from Oracle. What I see as one of the big education points that we give our clients is not to wait for Oracle. Is like you were saying, you need to value whatever that contract is, because Oracle's list fee is completely made up. It's not like they make a car and it costs $10,000 to make a car, and you're going to mark it up by 30% and sell it to you for $13,000, right? $47,500 for one processor of Oracle database hasn't changed in 15 years. It's a made up number, I think, to protect their support renewals. We could have a whole nother conversation about that, particularly with ULAs. You mentioned this earlier. Oracle sales came in with our percentage of revenue growth, right? We can look at our percentage of processor growth. We could look at what we spent the last time. We could come up, what's our budget? Like, I've seen 15 different ways to price out a ULA. And what I see as one of the biggest mistakes is customers waiting for Oracle, because Oracle is going to come on here, and you have to you want to come in here legitimately. And my favorite, and I had this conversation twice today with customers, I mean, if you really want to move the needle with Oracle, you need to be able to tell them this one thing. How about I give you nothing? How about you get nothing? right?
Absolutely.
If you could
Power.
say that, like certify, right? You mentioned we have the letter, we're going to certify. If you can say, how about nothing? Man, they become very accommodating.
Yeah, especially when, there's a number on their side of the ledger that you don't know, that's their minimum that they have to try to hit in order or make up with another account.
And that number is basically, how do I hit sales quota, right? It's not,
Mhm.
this keeps Oracle in business number. This
No.
is personally, I put my Oracle sales rep hat. I was never an Oracle sales rep, but if I was, I would put my hat on and I would say, what do I need to not get fired and make a lot of money, right? This is my number. And you sort of, Oracle sales, we've said this a few times, are really good. And you really need to get them focused on selling your position within their company, right? Within Oracle, right? Here's why this is good for Larry, and eventually it will be good for us, right? So there's a whole approval process within Oracle. I tell everyone there's like 6 people at Oracle who could say yes, and there's 50,000 people who could say no, right? So you got to get one of those 50,000 to convince one of those 6 to say yes, ultimately, when you're talking deals of this size and complexity. So what do you think of the ULA as a construct? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a depends thing? I mean,
I think well-managed ULAs are absolutely a great thing. The problem is when you don't manage the deployment, and you don't keep track of how it's going, then it's a ticking time bomb.
mhm.
And that's the potential for an Oracle. It was referred to as ticking time bomb over and over in my organization because of we just saw all of this massive clusters being created and oracles being deployed in those clusters, and it's just, you just think about, oh, okay, in 2 years, how is that going to impact us? So I really do think that's the way it is.
You know, we give, I know I give a lot of grief to Oracle. It makes great sort of press and we put stuff out on LinkedIn, but I agree with you. The ULA can be a great tool. Like if you're really growing, it's a
Yeah.
great tool. If you're signing ULA because you were found out of compliance and you really don't need it, it's a horrible. If you're shrinking, I have 10,000 in 3 years, I'm going to have 4,000. So I'm doing this ULA. Doesn't make any sense.
Well, and one of the things that I was burdened with that was happened before I did it is the traditional sourcing of aggregating everything into a single sort of construct really came and tied my hand behind my back, in that we also used Oracle Enterprise Apps, financials specifically, and it was it was in the ULA, or one big contract, and the repricing clause that we agreed to basically gave us no ability to move out of any of their technologies, because everything else could be repriced so that the maintenance stream wouldn't go down. So I really do caution folks who have separate agreements to put a lot of thought into how they do aggregate. Some things obviously should be aggregated together, and some things will hinder you if you decide to change things in the future.
Yeah, it's a very innocuous change. You know, I've seen too many clients of ours. They have 20 invoices a year from Oracle maintenance, and someone at Oracle said, "Hey, how would you like to have 1 invoice a year?" And they, "Oh, great, we'd love 1 invoice a year." And I was like, "No," but I will say, even in those situations, there is hope. So there's a way to work through that. Um, but yeah, a lot of Oracle policies are opposite of what you would just think.
And you mentioned that there's this big fallacy that we had, that those policies that they publish are part of the contract, and they just aren't. And they say a lot of things that just are ridiculous in some respects. And you have to call them on that. And I think you've done a really good job with some of your other clients of actually taking that to the extreme and really proving it, and having Oracle back off. But you can't let your your sales reps or anybody in the organization refer to those policies as hard and fast.
Yeah, today we see the two main policies we see like that are partitioning, the virtualization policy.
Right.
And at the bottom of it, it says this is for educational purposes, it's not part of your contract. But the big one we see now is the cloud policy, where they
Yeah.
talk about authorized cloud providers. I hear this all the time. It's like, I don't know what an authorized cloud provider is because it's not in your contract, right? So when it's in your contract, I'll know what it means. Until then, so here's another graphic. I thought you would find this one interesting. Again, looking for ways to get customers to think about Oracle. And again, if anybody has a question, please submit it. We don't have any yet. So Larry and I will just keep talking about stuff we want to talk about. But I thought this was another good one. Thinking about Oracle, where do we keep the unwritten rules? Where do we keep that virtualization policy that's not in our contract, or the cloud policy? And often with Oracle, and again, I'd love to hear other vendors, how they're doing this. Customers, I can review your, well, I can review my own contracts. I don't need you for that, Craig. But I say, I'm going to tell you what's not in those agreements and how Oracle's going to deal with you based on your reality. Are other vendors doing this? Do they have unwritten rules? Do they have policies that sort of can change at any time that are really not part of your contract?
Well, I haven't come across any recently. When the public cloud was really starting to take off, there was a lot of creating of a different licensing type that you had to actually add to your actual contracts, and there were lots of them that did that. Oracle obviously didn't do that, which I thought was somewhat short-sighted in that, one of the things
Larry, we had, I say we had web-specific licenses, they were called. You had full use and web-specific.
Oh, that's right. That's right. But I have to say that in our first ULA, that was one on the last day, May 31st, you were like, really pushing me to make sure that cloud usage was done. And they were just telling us, no. And you was like, yes, 11 o'clock at night, keep it going because you need that. And, I caved and I regretted it. At the end of the day, it didn't impact us in the long term because we were able to do what we wanted to do. But in the next ULA, we actually addressed the full usage in the cloud. But I have to say that you have more power than you ever think you do in the Oracle negotiation, and you just have to resist that urge, even with a great relationship with them, to take them and say they can't do anything about a specific area and put it in the contract, because again, their policy said something that was completely not what we wanted, and we wanted explicit permission to do what we wanted to do, and it was so ambiguous as a result of it not being in our contract. But we lived with that ambiguity for a couple of years and then fixed it in the next one.
Yeah, we definitely see with the ULAs, and we've done blogs on this, and we've actually brought up actual ULAs, because if you search on Oracle ULAs, you can find examples of specifically public sector ULAs, because they have to be put, they have to be put out to bid, and they're all visible. And we actually saw a ULA between NetSuite and Oracle. So Oracle buys NetSuite, right? And before they bought them, they had to go through SEC clearance. And one of the things in the public domain is that ULA before Oracle bought that company. So it's quite interesting. So you can see, specifically with cloud, you can see a 2010 ULA, a 2012, a 2015, and a today ULA. And you could see how Oracle really tightened that up, where in the past, there was nothing in the cloud, in the contracts about cloud. And then what they did is they put out a policy document. So it still wasn't in the contract, right? And then they finally, I think, got smart and put those restrictions, and I call them, they call it an unlimited license agreement. Well, It is the most limited, unlimited agreement I've ever seen. But they'll put restrictions in there about what you can and can't do in a public cloud. And I think, like you said, you have a lot of, I mean, you ultimately, you as the client have the money, right? So if you can say, how about I give you nothing, then you're going to get that concession, right? If you have to give them, if you have your, again, what I've seen is if you're of a procurement organization, have gone through this technical process of picking a vendor, and you pick Oracle and you let Oracle know you won, now let's start the contract negotiations, you're kind of screwed, right? Because now they know, hey, we won. They're going to sign. Why would we negotiate that price? Why would we You sort of have to keep an Oracle competitor or an option to what Oracle wants you to do, maybe not a competitor. So Oracle wants you to renew that ULA. You have to keep that option of not renewing that ULA. If you can have an option to what Oracle wants, you're going to get that deal.
Right. We didn't have any options from another technology in my experience, but this certification was certainly the big card in our strategy of negotiating, and it did work.
So we're sort of running out of time here, but May 31st is coming. Do you miss those midnight calls with Oracle sales?
Oh gosh, I remember PeopleSoft was January, so I did my New Year's Eve one PeopleSoft year. No, I don't miss any of that. Now, if a client needs my help, I obviously will jump in there. This time, I'm kind of had a couple years to kind of take my breath around all of those month-end deals, but I will certainly hop right in.
So how can the Simps Group help clients, whether it's Oracle or other vendors? Like, what do you guys do in this space? If I wanted to negotiate a big SAP, Salesforce contract, how can you help me?
Yeah, we're not as dedicated as you. We're more broad, and we're more around process and standardization and building the organization capability to be able to be successful to reduce these costs. That said, if there's any specific experience that any of us have around that a client has need, we certainly would step in on that particular deal. And we do have contract specialists and the people to help folks understand all the different things in a particular deal that they need to be considering and looking at if they have if they don't have that contract expertise. But it's really about building the capability of their organization to actually do this, and what are not only the processes but also the tool set, the spend analytics, the contract management tool set that's really necessary to be able to help with this long term.
Well, and I think, I'm very particular, Palisade is very particular about, who we recommend other folks work with, but I have no hesitations in telling anyone who's listening here, if you're interested in optimizing your procurement and sourcing, to pick up the phone and call Larry, because I saw what he did at his previous employer and the operation they had there, and just the guy knows what he's talking about. So, I couldn't recommend you guys. And I talked to Mike, so I know you guys. Definitely is it's worth. And I know you're generous enough to offer a free consultation. Anybody listening in, they could reach out to you. There's your email. And you'll get on the phone and chat with them about you, or someone on your team could get on the phone and talk with them about their challenges. So thank you. And then also, if anybody's looking, for help for Oracle specifically, feel free to reach out to us. We also have some training that's available for free on Paliversity, so you can sign up for that on that website. You all have our contact information there. Larry, I just want to thank you again for being part of this conversation, for your partnership over the years, your friendship. It's great working with you, and I really love the story of people going from big companies and starting something new. So wish you much success there. I know how challenging that can be.
Well, thank you, Craig, and I echo. I've thoroughly gotten a lot of value out of our friendship and relationship over the years, and hope it continues.
Awesome. Thanks, Larry. Thanks, everybody. Good luck with Oracle Q4.